Well, hey everybody, we're back. We're doing our line videos again. We're doing them now. We've missed the last couple of weeks because I've been out of the country and our kids have been on holiday. Now, Jen, your kids are still on holiday, but I think they're back to normal next week. Mine are already back at school. I want to start the dispatch video with a confession.
All right.
I have nothing to say in the dispatch this week. Like, we can come up with some stuff I can write, but I think it's a combination of I've sort of exhausted myself this week writing about like military stuff because I've talked about it a bunch. I've talked about it on my radio show. I wrote a column for us. I've edited stuff. And I know there are other stories in the news right now, but I feel like I'm trying to think of a non-puerile way of saying shot my wad. Had my say. I mean, maybe I don't feel like I have anything left to say. Also, this was a weird week in that I was saying with my friend Supriya Dwivedi, she was on my radio show today. She comes on with me normally about once a week. We talk federal politics. It was actually a pretty quiet week on the federal front for the first time in a while. There was the carbon announcement. I guess I could write something about that. But this was an unusually quiet week on the federal front after a pretty frantic few months.
Yeah, no, it was. It actually, I think, has been our quietest week since January, to be honest. But that being said, Matt, I have no doubt that between the two of us, you and I can fill 20 to 30 minutes of airtime with whatever random bullshit happens to pop into our brains.
I was at the Leaf game last night. Austin Matthews scored 50 goals. That was cool. I could do a dispatch blurb on that.
50 goals in one game?
One season.
Oh.
Yeah, it's 50 goals in one game would be amazing, but 50 goals in a season is still impressive. Yeah, I mean, I guess we can kind of just go around a bit. I mean, COVID numbers are bumping back up in Ontario. People are freaked. I honestly don't know what's going to happen. Like, I'm so numb on this. It's just like, yeah, well, we'll see what happens.
This is still Omicron, and it's a slightly more transmissible version of Omicron.
BA2
but also
or
you'll
something.
notice, yeah, BA2. So, but you'll also notice the hospitalization rates are still way down. Like they're not.
They're up, but yeah, I don't know yet if this is like a beginning of a surge or if this is like a plateauing.
It's a plateauing. The gap between the cases and the hospital rates is growing. So even if the hospital rates go up a little bit, the disparity is now so wide. I am not remotely concerned about this surge. I think this everything about this screams dead cat bounce to me. It's the totally predictable combination of us lifting restrictions and a slightly more transmissible version of Omicron. If you didn't get Omicron back in January, February, you're going to get it this round, and that's going to be that. Like it does not appear to be a particularly dangerous illness unless you were like over the age of 70 and unvaccinated.
It's interesting because I was, well, as you know, I was in the southeastern United States for the last 2 weeks. I got back a few days ago, and being in the southeastern United States, there's no pandemic there. I mean, I know like a lot of people are getting sick and dying, but like there's no evidence of the pandemic, like in terms of how people are living, with the exception of certain government facilities, right? So like when I was in like a shopping mall, there was some government office there, and they had signs up like masks must be worn indoors. So they still have some like residual mandates. So we kind of assumed, my wife and I, not that we were like hoping this would happen, but we were realistic about the fact that there was a pretty good chance that we were going to get COVID while we were down there. We're fully vaccinated, vaccine boosted. Our kids are vaccinated. So we weren't worried about it. But one of the things we did is we planned to have to extend our stay. So like we had a contingency plan in place because you can't get back into the country unless you pass your arrival test.
Well, until today.
Yeah. Right. We were fine. Everybody felt fine. We passed our pre-entry test, no problems. What we found out when we got back is that like our entire social group here in Toronto has just been dropping like flies from COVID. Some people feeling genuinely like actually quite ill. No one in the hospital, but like some people have had a miserable week or so.
Yeah, I mean that reflects my own experience with COVID back in with the BA1. Is that like it's a flu? Like it's not nothing. Like it's not like a cold. It is a serious flu, but it wasn't the most serious flu I've had in the last 5 years. And I can see how if you were extremely immunocompromised, and I mean extremely immunocompromised, even one of my very good friends with AIDS is like done. We're talking like 70-year-old multiple comorbidities and not vaccinated. Yes, you're probably not going to want to mess around with this, but at the same time, any flu would be risk to you. So I think it's in that territory. now. So I'm not really concerned. I don't expect hospital rates to go up very significantly. This, like I said, I think this is just going to be the version of the cleanup crew. The BA2 is just going to get everybody who wasn't got in the last 3 months.
I have no expectations. Like, I'm just so numb to all this now, which is maybe a good thing. Maybe it's like part of the psychological process of moving on. Maybe it's a terrible thing. I don't know. But whatever it is, I'm pretty numb to it.
Yeah. I like to probably like to continue our habit of not talking about COVID in the dispatch, because
I wouldn't have anything to say except, hey, I went to Florida, and while I was gone, everybody got COVID in Toronto.
Well,
So
and if I turn out to be wrong and we wind up seeing, like, hospitals getting overwhelmed or something, that would be a different conversation. But that didn't happen with BA1. I have no reason to suspect it's going to happen with BA2. So
yeah,
moving on. Yeah, I guess we'll see. But like absent that kind of marker, I say we just don't talk about it.
The other kind of going around the table, Ukraine. I mean, the Russians are pulling back in a lot of areas.
The Russians are pulling back, which is interesting.
It's kind of what I've been saying in some of our dispatches in recent weeks. The Russians don't have the logistics to keep going. Like, they cannot. Not only can they not maintain offensive operations, from what I can tell, they can't sustain their forces in the field. So the Russians are saying that this is a withdrawal as a sign of good faith. And someone snarkily tweeted, yeah, and the British pulled out of Dunkirk in 1940 as a sign of good faith. So the Russians are not retreating because they want to. I remain concerned as ever about escalation, but I mean, I guess either I'm calming down or I'm being lulled into a false sense of security. This whole thing is just becoming weird background noise, which I know sounds terrible for the people who are living there, but is this just going to bake in and become a long-term stalemated conflict? I don't know. It could.
Potentially. I mean, I think that still raises the escalation for us on the refugee file. And I think that Canada is doing a shitty job on that particular front.
We're working on that, by the way.
We're working on that. We're working on getting someone on the ground to talk to people about realistically, as much as the Canadian government got criticized last week. We wrote about this last week about creating like a two-tiered racialized system.
Yep. The
reason why we created that two-tier system is because Ukrainians aren't technically refugees, which means if they can get here, they get access to nothing, basically nothing. So like, Ukrainians are not getting some kind of specialized treatment here. In fact, quite the opposite. They are getting a much rougher ride. And we're going to try and explain to people a little bit about that. Like, actually getting to Canada is almost virtually impossible. And in fact, we were talking about that flight that former Alberta Premier Ed Stelmach and Thomas Lukaszuk flew over to Poland to bring refugees. They had a flight for 250 and they only brought back 65. And the reason with that is because getting the paperwork in order was basically impossible. So hopefully going to be getting more on that next week. But yeah, we're falling on our faces very badly on the refugee file and on Ukraine. So I think we should probably continue to push on that, but maybe that's more of a column than a dispatch blurb.
Yeah, first of all, I just want to mark the exciting occasion of my first on dispatch video sneeze. Luckily, I muted my microphone there. See, I think there's two ways to go about that story, and this is not for the dispatch. So we are working with one of our correspondents in Ukraine to try and firm up a little bit what it's like on that end of the refugee issue. I also think we could, possibly, there might, like, working with, we'll see what the piece that comes in from overseas looks like. But it might just be interesting for our perspective to break down some of it on our end. Because what I just keep thinking about is during the summer, Afghanistan, how the Americans and the Brits were like herding as many people as possible into those big C-17s, an American aircraft that the Allies use a lot. We have a bunch too. And we were neatly packing everyone into as many people as we could hold who would have a seatbelt, because that's what the Canadian bureaucracy insisted on. And eventually that was lifted, but we lost days and days and days where we could have been flying out hundreds of more people in each flight because of bureaucracy. I have a feeling that the more you and I poke around at the bureaucratic side of this, we're going to find out that, well, I mean, isn't it one of my meta narratives that the Canadian government is only capable of dealing with business as usual? And it is not, and as much as anything else, it is not psychologically prepared for an emergency, right? Like, I think an overwhelming percentage of the Canadian government blob, when presented with an emergency, clings more firmly to their notes and procedures and manuals. And anyway,
this is why we become so reliant on the military to fix things,
because they're the only ones who can actually work dynamically. Yeah,
that's right.
I agree.
So
That's
Anyway,
probably a
I
next
think that
week
that's
thing,
probably
though.
more of a column. That's probably more
Yeah.
of a reported piece than something we would normally do in the dispatch. So that leaves us with nothing.
I mean, I
Um,
can do a generic Russia Ukraine update kind of at the top.
yeah, it's really interesting that they're pulling back, and I think that the implications for that are really like, does that mean that we're going to start to see a de-escalation and a move toward a peace, a sort of stalemate kind of long protracted conflict, or does that mean that Russia does something really crazy like a tactical nuke?
So yeah, so that'll be my blurb. Any
Okay.
provincial stuff interesting? I mean, you and I spoke
Oh,
on my radio
yeah.
show this week about some of the Alberta stuff.
Yes, Danielle Smith is officially getting back into politics. So how much do you remember about Danielle Smith in the East?
Me personally, quite a bit. But I'm going to ask you a question here that's going to actually reveal the weakness of my knowledge. So I remember Danielle Smith when she was running the Wild Rose. Met her at a conference, thought she was quite impressive. A very intelligent person. I enjoyed my chat with her. She left politics and she became, for a time, a colleague of mine at Global News. So that's sort of why I have more of a memory of her than maybe true generally in the East. She and I were both at Global News at the time in the radio division. So
Oh,
what has she been doing since? Because that's the question I have for you. Because she resigned from Global. She did this whole big, I need to go find a place, speak
sorry.
my piece and do my thing. And then just boom, right off my radar.
Right. So the resumes you presented was a little bit truncated there. So she, was this figure in Alberta politics for a long time. She was actually a columnist at the Calgary Herald. So she went from journalism into politics.
Okay.
School board trustee, became this really, really controversial school board trustee figure. From there, gained enough of a profile to become leader of the Wild Rose Party.
Mhm.
To her absolute credit, turned the Wild Rose Party into a fringe thing to a serious contender for power in Alberta politics. And managed to wrangle some intense factions. I mean, the Wild Rose was never known as a party that was easy to manage. It always had its kind of loony fringe in there. That was where kind of it went. But they became a serious party with a serious shot at power and official opposition under Danielle Smith. Then Prentice takes over the helm as the head of the PC party.
Yeah.
And Danielle Smith loses her shot at power quite dramatically when she agrees to remerge a faction of the Wild Rose Party with the PC party. And then of course immediately afterwards, Prentice calls a snap election, giving the Wild Rose no time to regroup. That's when Brian Jean gets pulled in, takes over the helm of the Wild Rose Party, and actually manages to sustain the Wild Rose Party despite this dramatic floor crossing.
Yeah.
This is what now in hindsight regarded as one of the worst mistakes in Alberta politics, this choice to regroup, because it really went against the membership. It was seen as a huge betrayal. And I think every single Wild Rose floor crosser wound up subsequently losing their nomination battle, including Danielle Smith. So she was unceremoniously booted from Alberta politics, with a big sense of like, you've betrayed us and you've betrayed the party. Like it was pretty nasty.
Is that when she went to Global News?
That's when she
went to
Global News. Yeah, that's when she went to QR77. That was also pretty rocky because she was quite considered quite controversial. I mean, she had probably most notoriously had Kaylin Ford on her show, who was kicked out of her nomination when a guy who she alleged was stalking her released all this damaging private chats about her in Press Progress. So that was a whole other side controversy. And after that, Danielle Smith was considered like the monster du jour because she had platformed Kaylin Ford and allowed her to tell her side of the story.
Sorry, this is not translating on my Ontario brain. So Kaylin Ford had made allegations and someone had the receipts that blew them up?
Yeah, essentially. So Kaylin Ford was one of the young things for the UCP that ran in the 2019 election. And she got blown up because a guy who she alleged later was stalking her released these private DMs between the two of us, basically making her look like a racist, essentially.
Oh, so it wasn't like proving that he wasn't stalking her. He just retaliated somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly. So this blew up Kaylin Ford's political career. And Kaylin Ford's still kind of in the background in Alberta politics. She went on Danielle Smith's show to try and defend herself and was like, no, I'm not a racist. this creep just released these DMs out of
Oh my
context.
gosh, I remember this now. Okay, yeah. Now, yeah. Okay, yeah. The name did not ring a bell, but now I remember this. Yes.
Now you this. So
Yeah.
because Danielle Smith had Caitlin Ford on her show,
Yeah.
she was like, the left just turned on her and was like, not that they were ever on her side, but just treated her like an absolute monster neo-Nazi. And like, I think even like Rachel said that no NDPer was allowed to go on her show. Like it was pretty nasty. It was pretty ridiculous actually. But anyway, so shortly thereafter, Danielle Smith quits. She says, I can't actually say my piece. I can't actually, free speech, blah, 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 blah. She quits. She then becomes the president of the Alberta Enterprise Group. And she's had a pretty sweet little gig as the Alberta Enterprise Group. She was producing kind of like this a podcast that was for that group. So it was a bit of a think tanky kind of a job, but she was well set up. She had a pretty cushy gig. And then she decides in the midst of all this Kenny stuff, nope, I'm going to quit all my cushy gigs and I'm going to give this politics thing the second try.
Interesting.
This is crazy. Like, I don't think you get a second try at politics. And I don't think you get a second try at politics.
Patrick Brown running for Conservative leader, Jean Charest running for Conservative leader.
They haven't won.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I actually probably would agree with you, but if you don't get a second try in politics, someone needs to tell the politicians.
That's fair, but I mean, when you lose your nomination battle because oh man, oh honey. I don't know if we're allowed to put this in our video, but like I think Danielle Smith loves politics. I think that she almost became premier. Like she did. She almost became premier. And, every woman's smart until she falls in love with the boy who beats her. And I have a feeling that this boy is going to beat her.
You can say that in the Dispatch video. I have to say how appalled I am by the illusion. But no, I think, it's funny. I was just talking with Sabrina DeVetti's second shout out on the on the Dispatch video today, but she and I were talking about that on my radio show about the politicians who cannot help but come back. And it's like, sometimes it makes sense. It's like, okay, I left after, it was time for change in the party and I went to the private sector and I'm coming back. Other times it is like, no, stay down. You have a concussion. Like, we're calling the trainer out onto the ice. We're going to get the backboard out and no, I can get up. I can skate off. Like, no, stay down. And we're talking about like just the personality of the people who do this, the ones who just get addicted to politics, right? Yeah. I don't know Smith well enough to say, but like Jean Charest running for Conservative leader, I look at that and I think, what the fuck? Like, and I'm not even passing judgment on his fitness as a leader. I'm just thinking to myself, why? Like you had so many years when you've been doing other stuff. Patrick Brown, mayor of Brampton, that's a legit job. Like that's not a consolation prize. He is the mayor of a large, dynamic, growing city in the Greater Toronto area, but he wants to be it's just, I don't understand this about people. This is like a personality thing. I've mentioned this before in one of our videos before. You want to know what my goal is in life? I want to be left alone. Like,
I want to know what this is, the fundamental divide between journalists and politicians, because we share a lot of personality traits and we share a lot of interests, but the real difference between journalists and politicians is that journalists don't desire power.
Yeah. Yep.
There are some journalists who get sucked into politics because they feel obliged or whatever, but you can't be a journalist and be power hungry. Not if you're going to be in this job for any length of time, because you're going to see everything that you actually do turn to ashes and
totally ineffective.
And you're going to be demonstrated that you can raise awareness about anything you want, but that doesn't guarantee anybody gives a shit.
No, so it almost guarantees they won't.
Yeah.
Like, if there's any guarantee I would offer a young journalist out there, it is that your labors will be for nothing.
Yes. I mean, this is an almost a Zen profession in that way, because you really do have to learn how to like love the job for the sake of just doing the job without worrying about whether or not it will have an impact or not. The journalists who don't get this, they all get disillusioned and they all wash out. The journalists who don't get this don't stay in the industry, and that's why activist journalists don't last very long. Yeah. Because ultimately the real
progress.
they don't make progress. And also the real difference between, I honestly think that's the real difference between journalists and politicians is that journalists, I mean, talking about journalists who stay in the profession for 10 plus years, is that you can't be power hungry. It just, you can't. Fame hungry maybe, but not power hungry.
Yeah, no, and to the point, I also don't trust people who are power hungry. Like right in my bones, if you want to be a politician, my first question is, yeah, it's yes. And it's not true in every case, because I have known politicians who are in it for good reasons. I'm not going to say like the right reasons, because that's, but like they're in it for good reasons. Others, I like, my automatic assumption is, why do you want to control me? Like that's like that in my brain, like, and I know better because you're professional decorum. Someone tells me they're running for office, my immediate instinct is, why are you power hungry? I do not trust it. And I actually think that is a good journalism instinct, right? To have that reflexive, not only not wanting power, but being reflexively distrustful of it is a useful instinct. The one thing I will add, then we can move on. So I think you're going to write something about the Danielle Smith thing, right?
I'll do a little blurb. I mean, I don't want to like completely overwhelm a mostly Ontario audience with like latest episode of Days of Our Lives recap, but like it is a really,
they do well.
They do well, and also they're this. I mean, it is wild. It is wild.
Only thing I will add to this, and this is maybe the only insight I can offer about Danielle Smith from Ontario, what she said about not being able to speak at Global, I have a litany of complaints with Global News. I could fill this dispatch laying out my thoughts on Global News and some of the management there. They never imposed any editorial restrictions on what I could say. Never. And I was there for years. I did not clear my topics on the radio in advance. I had complete discretion to veer off the show plan. And
I'm not sure that this beef was leveled at Global News so much as it was the culture. Like, I think that I mean, I'd have to go back to a review, but like, I think that her real beef was that like culturally, it had become impossible to have difficult conversations without like getting mobbed on Twitter, and it just wasn't worth the drama anymore.
And delete your fucking Twitter account. Grow up.
She did.
Like that. Like that's how you make that problem go away. Anyway, so look. I'm not someone who reflexively defends Global News as an institution, but for the record, I worked there for years in a commentary role because the radio guys were considered commentators. We weren't bound by like the news standards of. Occasionally, every once in a while, the bosses would say like, "Hey, like the company is part of like this charitable initiative. Do you mind doing an interview on the show with someone who's like combating this disease?" And I'd go, sure, happy to. Like that's part of the job. But in terms of like forcing me to advocate positions or telling me I couldn't, nope, never. So
speaking of that, we do have some slightly sort of wokey stuff to chat about, which was interesting. It looks like wokey stuff has kind of become a theme of this particular week's dispatch. I've actually half written my side of the blurbs, so I'm sorry, I'm cheating. But let me go off. So basically, this was an interesting one. Tristan Hopper did a thing in his newsletter for the National Post that noted that BC was going through all of its old laws and
making them gender neutral or something, right?
Making them gender neutral. Yeah. And like some of these changes are fine, like changing his or hers to an individual's. Like that's fine, but like some of it is like they're getting rid of gendered language, like father and aunt. And like I have a bit of a philosophical beef with this because bluntly that language isn't offensive, and it's the law is treating this language as de facto offensive, which isn't, or it's one thing for a law to change to reflect the sort of the standards and language of the time, and it's another thing for the law to sort of go ahead of where, or to imagine it knows to go ahead of where the standards, linguistic standards actually are. And I don't think that 99% of people think that words like father or mother are offensive in any way.
Is this another example of Twitter not being real life though? Like, I mean, is it that simple? Like there's people like, think of where the controversy over gender terms like mother, father, grandfather, grandmother, blah, 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 where that controversy is it anywhere outside of a very small slice of academia and social media?
No, and that's the point. Like you will never have a real life conversation where you say I'm a mother and somebody's like, That is
You're a
exclusionary
parent.
language. That does not happen in real life. That is absolutely not a real life thing that is occurring. Outside of, yes, extremely, like maybe there's like a coffee shop in the annex where that doesn't go over, like, you know what I mean, like that, but that's it.
Sure.
And so that's kind of my point. But I mean, I think what's more interesting to this is to note the politics of it, because I don't think it's telling tales out of school to say that if you are a genuinely progressive or radical leftist in British Columbia, John Horgan's not been a particularly useful premier to you. He's not proposed any kind of radical NDP agenda. Most of the stuff that's left has been extremely fringy and or kind of irrelevant. And he's been, for the most part, a pretty centrist premier on everything from COVID to
Economics, energy, environment.
economics and energy. There's nothing you could slap a liberal label on John Horgan and would not be surprised by
Yeah.
anything that he's done. So I mean, the takeaway from all of this is that the reality of governing is that it's always a centrist endeavor. But the actual other thing is that I think that a lot of the stuff, it's really easy to do things like, we're just going to make bureaucrats take the word his and her out of all of these laws, because that's easy and consequence free, and it throws a bone to the progressive base, and it doesn't actually cost them anything. It allows them to beef up some progressive bona fides. Right.
This reminds me of, I wrote years ago in Maclean's about this, how just our politics is memeified. And it's sort of like the governments are going to do whatever they're going to do, and the opposition is going to do whatever they're going to do, but they're both going to do stuff on social media that is micro-targeting base segments, right?
That's
so
exactly, yes.
And
that's how I read it. Like, does it really matter that the word father is getting written out of law? No, not really. It pisses off the right people if you're a progressive. So
it pleases the right people and angers the right people.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But I mean, I philosophically don't like messing with legal language for that reason. I think that's this time it's probably harmless. Next time it might not be so harmless. And we all know that like a slight change of grammar in the law matters, because it changes the way people will pick apart and interpret that law. So like it matters, but it doesn't matter, but it does matter at the same time. You know what I mean?
I look forward to seeing how you write that in the blurb. So you're gonna see. I feel so useless today. I mean, here's the thing. Like, just so that you and the audience knows, I've spent this entire week getting caught up. Like, having been out of the country, and I spent most of today doing first quarter financial stuff for the line. So my brain is, I've just been getting a lot of that stuff. So I'm basically clued out on the news, but in general, yeah, I agree with you. And I think there is a bigger, like, I agree with you. It's not like, who cares? It's not that big of a deal in this particular instance. But the problem is, I don't think this stuff is entirely harmless. And I don't mean specifically the language stuff. I think the memification of our politics is rotting brains within our politics, where I think there is like a growing, and I've talked about this before, our politics is uncoupling from governance. Our politics is becoming this free floating amorphous blob that's orbiting our governance, but it's not really our governance. Like, you're not being elected anymore in order to execute an agenda that you have any reasonable confidence you'll actually be able to execute. You're being elected.
The right people are in power.
Yeah, and then you just maintain the same bullshit memeified battles. And meanwhile, the civil service is fucking telling Afghans to get a goddamn seatbelt on before we evacuate them from the country.
Yeah, right? We're telling Ukrainian non-refugees that they have to go to Paris to get their biometrics before they can, like.
So like, the politicians are like sending mean tweets to each other, and the civil service is running itself, and we're shocked that things aren't working well. So, I mean, I think that's where the harm in this comes from. And I could write a great blurb about that, but you've already written it. So I remain useless.
I mean, you could write an extension of that and just be like, look, we think the thing above doesn't matter, but does matter. And here's why. Like,
all
you
right.
You could do it. You can appendage to the last blurb.
I am an appendage. I am limited to an appendage this week. That is about as useful as I will be.
And then the other thing I think was noted is this was a bit of a tweet thread I had that actually turned out to be more popular than I expected it to be. But there was a lot of sort of defund the CBC chants, and I don't know, did Pierre Paul ever say that he was going to defund the CBC outright? I mean,
I swear to God, I'm not going to
Okay.
be plugged back into the news until next week. I don't know, maybe.
Point being, the defund the CBC things come up again, and I did a tweet thread to the effect of like, no, we shouldn't defund the CBC because, you know, with corporate media collapsing, there's going to be a need and a role for a public broadcaster, and I don't think that that's a problem. But we absolutely do need a goddamn CBC mandate review, and a serious mandate review.
Yeah.
We need to seriously narrow and focus the scope of the CBC, because that organization has become dysfunctional and ridiculous. They've become, just as the Canadian bureaucracy has become, non-innovative and not able to identify what they do best and execute on that. So, like, I do think
one of the top stories on cbc.ca/news right now: Justin Bieber, The Weeknd, and more Canadian nominations to know ahead of the Grammys.
I mean, crucial. How would that have been covered if the CBC weren't there to do it?
And I'm not trying to be a dick about this, right? Because everything else on the page is relevant stuff. The Pope's apology to Indigenous leaders.
Sure.
But yeah, no, I mean, I'm just glancing at the top stories on cbc.ca/news right now, and how realistic is it to take a road trip in an electric vehicle? Amazon workers at New York warehouse vote to unionize. Marketplace test reveals AA batteries with the best bang for your buck and ones to avoid.
I mean, none of this,
Yeah.
none of it would be the answer.
Yeah.
So I don't know what to say. I don't know if that's worth even just flagging the tweet thread. If you just want to say, hey, look, our line editor had some things to say about the CBC, and I could just throw the tweet thread in there. And then what was the other thing? Oh, the other thing I've already written about was that the Daily Wire's getting into the anti-woke market. And I have a little comment about one of the things that I think is very annoying about a lot of the people on the left just dismissing this stuff as grifting is like, yeah, of course it's grifting. They're taking advantage of a market opportunity that you are handing them on a silver platter.
Well, what have I been telling you for years that I've been telling my friends on the left? They really have no idea that a lot of what they see is a reaction to what they're doing, and that's not blaming them. Like, they always go, you can't blame me for the right wing is doing.
It's a dynamic.
Yes,
right? Like,
and they don't understand that you are part of the process too. And that's like, I just do not understand how really, really smart people seem to think that the other side of the culture war is this free-floating, self-sustaining thing that they have no connection to.
No, this is a dynamic with one side playing off of the other and vice versa.
Of course, it's like, yeah. You know, it's been a weird week of people just not getting basic stuff. Did you see Stephen Taylor, and then Chris Selly jumped into it as well? Some conservative MP called Justin Trudeau a dictator or something. Like, again, this is me being half out of touch.
Oh, do we want to do the dictator thing? Yeah, I saw that.
But everybody's outraged. And then Stephen Taylor is like, all right, let's talk about double standards. And he just started showing receipts of all the times liberals, MPs or affiliates, called Stephen Harper either a dictator or the Stephen Harper government a dictatorship. And what's incredible is how the people were stepping forward. Like, people were coming forward and going, no, it's not a double standard because it's different. Do you not know what a double standard is? Like, a double standard is literally when you say it is okay for one side to do it, but not the other because of a difference. And
because Stephen Harper was a dictator, Matt. That's what made it different.
And here's the thing, like, I'm not defending what the conservative MP said. Obviously, it was stupid. Just like it was stupid when we had almost 10 years of people calling Stephen Harper, the guy who had 2 minority governments, a dictator.
That's the blurb. Can you write that blurb?
I got nothing else to do, so sure. So I will do the Ukraine intro blurb, and I will do the double standard blurb. Do you want me to do the follow-up, the memification thing, or do you want to just fold that into
read what's there and see what you want to do?
Yep.
If it inspires you, then I'd say go for it. And then I'll throw in my...
inspires me. You are my muse.
I'm many a man's muse, my dear. All right, so then I've got to still write Smith. I'm going to throw in the little Twitter thread, and then we have something else coming from one of our other partners here.
Good. Okay.
So
I mean, I apologize for being so thoroughly useless. I actually feel like today, for the first time since I got back from the US, I actually had, like, I've worked my way through my to-do list. Like, today is the first day I'm actually caught up on anything, but I had to spend all today like doing paperwork and paying people, which is nice. I love paying people.
You've managed to fill like 36 minutes of airtime here.
Yeah, that's
like
true.
Effortlessly.
All right, so you're gonna go have some lunch?
I'm gonna go have some lunch with my husband because he's feeling neglected.
No, I mean, you are also his muse, so I can understand that.
Well, there you go. Kind of.
All right. All right, so we'll send it.
And then I've got a column to write for, and I'll have that ready for Monday.
Did you do the interview? You were waiting on an interview. Did you get that done?
Yeah, I did do the interview. Yeah, it's all good. I was going to do this column for today, but then Paul Wells filed, and Paul Wells wins. So
Paul Wells wins. Wells wins. Okay, that's all I got. Talk to you soon.
All right, talk soon.
Enjoy lunch.
Bye.